Chapter 6. How the Scrolls Were Found. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls is widely regarded as one of the most significant archaeological and textual finds of the 20th century, emerging in the years immediately following the Second World War. The scrolls captured international attention not only because of their antiquity, but because of their direct re- re- revealance to the Bible and the religious world from which both Judaism and Christianity emerge, according to the standard account. These manuscripts were uncovered accidentally in 1947, and additional finds up into 1956 in a series of caves along the limestone cliffs near Qumran, situated on the northwest shore of the Dead Sea. My laptop's about to go out of batteries. There we go. The importance of the discovery lay primarily in chronology. Let's try that again. No, we're not going to restart this chapter. We're going to power through this. The importance of the discovery lay primarily in chronology. Prior to the scroll's emergence, the oldest complete Hebrew biblical manuscripts dated to the medieval period, more than a millennium after the composition of many biblical books. The Dead Sea Scrolls were presented as manuscript evidence, reaching back into the final centuries before and just after the turn of the era, thereby dramatically narrowing the chronological gap between the composition of the biblical texts and the surviving manuscript tradition. As a result, the scrolls were quickly hailed as a breakthrough for biblical studies, textual criticism, and reconstruction of Second Temple Judaism. Beyond their biblical content, the scrolls were said to illuminate the belief practices and internal diversity of Jewish groups living in Judea during the late Second Temple period. Sectarian writings, legal texts, biblical commentaries, and liturgical compositions were interpreted as preserving the intellectual and spiritual world of a particular Jewish community, commonly identified as the Essenes. Within this framework, the scrolls came to be viewed not merely as isolated manuscripts, but as the remnants of a coherent library reflecting the life of a distinct religious movement. According to the standard account, the story of the Dead Sea Scrolls began in early 1947 with a chance discovery by Bedouin shepherds of the Ta'amare tribe. I'm sure I pronounced that right. Who were grazing their goats along the rugged limestone cliffs overlooking the Dead Sea. The area, marked by numerous natural caves and difficult terrain, had long been frequented by local tribes, though it was not known to be of archaeological significance at the time. Later recollections describe how one of the shepherds, Muhammad Dib, weird names, searching for a stray goat, threw a stone into the opening of a small cave high on the cliff face. Instead of hearing the stone striking rock, he reportedly heard the sound of pottery shattering. Curious about the unexpected noise, the shepherds climbed into the cave to investigate. Inside, they discovered several tall, cylindrical clay jars, some with lids still intact. Within these jars were leather scrolls wrapped in linen, clothes preserved by the dry desert environment. The cave would later be designated as Cave 1 by archaeologists, though at the time the shepherds had no reason to associate the finds with antiquity or historical importance. The scrolls appeared old and brittle, but their contents and significance were entirely unknown to the discoverers. The event is portrayed in the official narrative as a purely accidental encounter, unconnected to any deliberate search for ancient manuscripts or antiquities, and arising from routine pastoral activities rather than archaeological exploration. Unaware of the scroll's potential value or meaning, the Bedouins removed several of the manuscripts and fragments from the cave. In the process, some materials were reportedly damaged, either through handling, exposure, or attempts to separate the text. Portions of the find were left behind, while others were taken back to Bedouin camps or passed along intermediaries. The shepherds soon sought to sell the scrolls through local antiquity dealers, primarily in Bethlehem, where a small but active trade in ancient artifacts existed. The manuscripts circulated discreetly among traders and middlemen, changing hands multiple times before coming to the attention of individuals with scholarly training. During this early period, the scrolls were sometimes cut or divided in order to facilitate sale, and their precise origins were not carefully documented. As a result, the earliest chain of custody for the scrolls remains partially obscured in the official record. While later reconstructions attempted to piece together the sequence of events, this internal phase of informal handling and private trade introduced lasting uncertainties regarding the exact circumstances of the discovery. The number of manuscripts originally present and the condition of the scrolls at the moment they first left the cave. I should read that again, but I'm not going to. The transition from accidental discovery to scholarly recognition occurred in late 1947 when several of the newly discovered manuscripts came to the attention of Eliezer Suchnik, a professor of archaeology and ancient Jewish studies at the University of Jerusalem. At the time, Jerusalem was experiencing significant political tension as the British Mandate neared its end, making scholarly access to newly surfaced antiquities both difficult and uncertain. Despite these conditions, Suchnik was unable to examine portions of the manuscripts obtained through antiquity dealers based on the handwriting, the physical characteristics of the material, and the linguistic features of the text. He concluded that the scrolls were ancient Jewish writings dated to the Second Temple period. He further suggests that they may have been composed or copied before the destruction of Jerusalem by Roman forces in AD 70. Suchnik's assessment represented the first formal academic recognition of the scroll's historical significance. His his conclusions, recorded in personal notes and preliminaries publications, placed the manuscripts within a period previously unattested by surviving Hebrew biblical texts. This identification transformed what had been an obscure antiquities transaction into a matter of major scholarly importance and laid the groundwork for subsequent institutional involvement in the study of the scrolls. While some manuscripts were examined in Jerusalem, four of the scrolls from Cave 1 followed a different path, where these were acquired by Mar Samuel, the Syrian Orthodox metropol, metropolitan metropolitan of Jerusalem, who recognized their potential value and preserved them during the political instability surrounding the 1948 conflict. Among these manuscripts was a nearly complete scroll of the Book of Isaiah, which would become one of the most celebrated texts in the collection. Mar Samuel transported the scrolls to the United States, where they were examined by scholars affiliated with the American Schools of Oriental Research. Specialists in ancient Near Eastern languages and biblical studies assert, assessed the manuscripts and reached conclusions similar to those of Suchnik regarding their antiquity. Their findings were announced publicly in 1948, confirming that the scrolls represented ancient Jewish texts dating to the centuries surrounding the turn of the era. This public announcement brought international attention to the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. News of it, news of the Isaiah scroll in particular captured the imagination of both scholars and broader public, as it appeared to offer direct manuscript evidence for a biblical book far older than any previously known copy. From this point forward, the scrolls were no longer a regional curiosity but a global scholarly phenomenon, prompting intensified searches for additional manuscripts and formal archaeological investigation of the Qumran region. The discovery of early the discovery and early study of the Dead Sea Scrolls unfolded during a period of profound political upheaval in the region. As we discussed earlier, the late 1940s marked the collapse of the British Mandate in Palestine and the rapid escalation toward open conflict between Jewish and Arab communities. In 1948, the Declaration of the State of Israel was followed almost immediately by the Arab Israeli War, fundamentally reshaping border institutions and access to territory. This volatile environment had a direct impact on the handling and study of the scrolls. Travel between Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and the Dead Sea region became increasingly difficult, limiting scholarly access to both the manuscripts and the caves from which they originated. Researchers found themselves separated by newly drawn political boundaries, and cooperation between scholars of different national or religious backgrounds became more complicated. As a result, early work on the scrolls was often fragmented, with parallel lines of investigation developing in relative isolation from one another. The instability also affected decisions about where the scrolls would be stored, examined, and published. Concerns over security, ownership, and preservation shaped the movement of the manuscripts during these years, contributing to the delays and uncertainties that would influence the trajectory of the Dead Sea Scrolls research for decades. One of the most consequential developments in the early history of the scrolls occurred in 1954 when the four Cave 1 manuscripts had been taken to the United States were quietly purchased on behalf of the State of Israel. These scrolls had been offered for sale through a newspaper advertisement, and their acquisition was arranged discreetly in order to ensure their return to Jerusalem. Following this transaction, the scrolls were transferred to Israel and joined other manuscripts already under Israeli control. Over time, the majority of the known Dead Sea Scrolls were consolidated within Israeli institutions, where they were housed primarily at the Rockefeller Museum in East Jerusalem. This museum became the central hub for conservation, study, and publication of the scrolls during the early decades of research. The consideration of the manuscripts within Israeli custody provided a stable institutional framework for their long-term preservation and scholarly examination. At the time, at the same time, it marked a shift from the scroll's early circulation through private hands and international institutions to formal state oversight. From this point forward, the study of the Dead Sea Scrolls would be closely tied to Israeli academic and cultural institutions, shaping both the practical and intellectual counters of the field. In the years following the internal discovery in 1947, let's try that again. In the years following the initial discovery in 1947, attention increasingly turned to the cliffs and ravines surrounding Qumran. The reports of ancient manuscripts quickly spread among local Bedouin communities, promoting members of various tribes to search the area for additional caves that might contain similar materials. At the same time, professional archaeologists and representatives of academic institutions began organizing more systematic surveys. In an effort to locate further evidence of manuscript deposits, these parallel efforts led to the identification of numerous additional caves over the course of several years. Archaeologists eventually number these sites sequentially designating them as caves 2 through 12. Some caves were located through formal archaeological exploration using established survey methods, while others were discovered by Bedouins searching independently for antiquities and later reporting their finds to scholars or dealers. The investigation, the involvement of both Bedouin and archaeologists contributed to the mixed pattern of discoveries and documentation, while professional surveys aim to record the archaeological context of each cave. Materials found by Bedouin often entered the antiquity markets before being formally examined. Nevertheless, the cumulative results of these searches was the recovery of a substantial corpus of manuscripts and fragments that greatly expanded the scope of the original find and reinforced the perception that the Qumran region had once housed a significant collection of texts. Among the newly identified sites, Cave 4, discovered in 1952, proved to be the most important and puzzling. Unlike Cave 1, which contained several intact scrolls stored in jars, Cave 4 yielded no complete manuscripts and no surviving storage vessel. Instead, it contained tens of thousands of small fragments representing the remains of hundreds of individual texts. According to the official explanation, these manuscripts had originally been stored on shelves within the cave rather than sealed in jars. Over time, the shelves are said to have collapsed, and the manuscripts were subsequently damaged by natural processes, human disturbance, or both. The resulting disintegration left the text in an extremely fragmentary state, making reconstruction a slow and complex task. Despite their condition, the fragments from K4 were of immense scholarly value. They included copies of biblical books, sectarian writings, legal texts, and commentaries, greatly expanding the range of literature associated with the Dead Sea Scrolls. The sheer volume and diversity of the material from K4 solidified its status as the central repository of the Qumran manuscript collection and played a decisive role in shaping subsequent research, publication efforts, and interpretation of the scrolls as a whole. As manuscript discoveries multiplied in the surrounding caves, scholarly attention increasingly focused on the nearby ruins of Khirbet Qumran, located a short distance from the Dead Sea shoreline. Between 1951 and 1956, systematic excavations of the site were carried out under the direction of Ronald DeVoe. I think that's how you pronounce it. I might be very wrong. I'm not even going to spell it for you. But let's continue. A Dominican priest and archaeologist affiliated with the École biblique et archéologique Francisi in Jerusalem. I think it's all French. French is a stupid language. I might screw it. DeVoe approached the site with the assumption that the manuscripts discovered in the caves were connected in some way to the settlement of Qumran. Based on archaeological remains, pottery typology, and apparent isolation of the location, he concluded that the site had been occupied by a communal Jewish group during the late Second Temple period. Drawing on descriptions of Jewish sects found in ancient sources such as Josephus, Philo, and Pliny the Elder, DeVoe identified this community with the Essenes, a group known for its ascetic lifestyle, communal organization, and strict observance of ritual law. According to DeVoe, reconstruction of Qumran functioned as a long term settlement rather than a temporary outpost. He proposed multiple phases of occupation, including periods of construction, destruction, and reoccupation, which he believed aligned with broader historical events in Judea, culminating in the Roman destruction of the site during the Jewish revolt of AD 70. Within the official interpretive framework, the architectural and material remains uncovered at Qumran were understood to reflect the daily life of the disciplined sectarian community. Several rooms were identified as communal spaces, including a large assembly or dining hall where members were thought to have gathered for shared meals conducted under ritual regulation. Adjacent facilities were interpreted as areas for food preparation and storage, supporting the idea of communal living. Particular attention was given to the site's water installations, including a complex system of channels, cisterns, and stepping pools. These features were interpreted as ritual baths, indicating a strong emphasis on ritual purity, consistent with descriptions of the same practice in ancient literature. The number of the number and scale of these installations were cited as evidence that ritual washing played a central role in the community's religious life. Additional finds, such as inkwells and writing related artifacts, were taken as signs that Qumran served as a scribal center where manuscripts were copied or produced. Within this model, the nearby caves were understood as storage locations for the community's library, used to safeguard their texts during periods of unrest. Together, these interpretations formed the cohesive picture of Qumran as a religious settlement devoted to communal discipline, ritual purity, and preservation of sacred writings. Within the official framework, the presence of manuscripts in the caves surrounding Qumran is explained as a result of deliberate preservation efforts undertaken during the time of crisis. The standard narrative places the activity in the context of the Jewish revolt against Roman rule, which erupted in AD 66 and culminated in the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in AD 70. As Roman legions advanced through Judea, many communities are believed to have taken measures to protect valued religious and cultural materials from destruction or confiscation. According to this reconstruction, members of the Qumran community removed their library from the settlement and concealed the manuscripts in nearby caves carved into the limestone cliffs. The caves, already known to the inhabitants of the area, provided natural hiding places that were difficult to access and offered a stable, dry environment suitable for long-term storage. Scrolls were placed in jars or wrapped in protective material depending on the cave and the circumstances of concealment. The intention within this model was not permanent abandonment but temporary safeguarding. The community is said to have expected that the crisis would pass and that the manuscripts could later be retrieved and returned to use. However, the destruction of Qumran settlement, either through direct military action or as a consequence of the broader conflict, combined with the death, capture, or dispersal of its inhabitants, prevented any organized recovery of the hidden text. As a result, the scrolls remained undisturbed in the caves for nearly 2 millennia. Preserved by the arid climate of the Judean desert, they survived as silent witness to a vanished community and a turbulent period in Jewish history, awaiting their accidental rediscovery in the mid 20th century. Following the initial identification of the Dead Sea Scrolls, scholars moved quickly to publish the most complete and legible manuscripts in order to establish their significance. Priority was given to the scrolls recovered from Cave 1, which included relatively well preserved works such as the nearly complete Isaiah scroll, the Habakkuk commentary, and several other substantial texts. These manuscripts were edited translated and released in the 1940s and early 1950s, only a few years after their discovery. The rapid publication of these early scrolls played a decisive role in shaping their reception within the dominant scholarly framework. The manuscripts were identified as ancient Jewish texts, broadly in line with the Hebrew Bible, yet containing textual variants that were taken to indicate a more fluid textual tradition. Comparisons between the Jewish between, comparisons between the Isaiah scroll and the Masoretic text were especially influential. While the high degree of agreement was acknowledged, the observed difference were interpreted as evidence that multiple textual forms of scripture circulated prior to the late stabilization of the Masoretic text, the Masoretic tradition. So they say. From this perception, from this perspective, the Dead Sea Scrolls were hailed as a landmark discovery. They were understood to demonstrate both general stability of the biblical transmission and the existence of early textual diversity, thereby reshaping scholarly models of how the biblical text developed during the Second Temple period. From the Masoretic standpoint, however, the same evidence may be read differently. The strong continuity between the scrolls and the Masoretic text is best explained not by parallel textual traditions, but by the careful preservation of the authoritative text that already existed. The variant found in Dead Sea Scrolls need not represent earlier equally valid forms of Scripture, but may instead reflect localized copying practices, interpretive expansions, sectarian revisions, or textual instability within a particular communities. On this reading, the Masoretic text does not emerge as a late achievement imposed on a fluid tradition, but as the faithful guardian of the original readings, from which the Dead Sea Scrolls text is in various ways have diverged. As discoveries expanded beyond Cave 1, particularly within the recovery of tens of thousands of fragments from Cave 4, the tasks of publication became significantly more complex. Responsibility for editing and reconstructing these materials was assigned to the international team of scholars, each entrusted with specific texts or groups of fragments. This group, often referred to as the Scrolls Team, operated under the supervision of senior editors based primarily at the Rockefeller Museum in Jerusalem. The fragmentary condition of many manuscripts posed formidable challenges. Individual texts often survived only in a dozen or hundreds of small pieces, requiring painstaking efforts to identify handwriting styles, reconstruct columns layouts, and determine textual relationship. The process of assembling these fragments into coherent manuscripts was slow and labor intensive, demanding specialized expertise and long term scholarly commitment. As a result, publication progressed gradually, and many texts remained unpublished for decades. According to the official explanation, these delays were not the result of international withholding, but rather a consequence of the unprecedented scale of the material and technical difficulty of reconstruction. Over time, however, the prolonged the prolonged lack of access to many scrolls became a defining feature of the Dead Sea Scrolls scholarship, shaping both academic discourse and public perception of how the manuscripts were being studied and controlled. Establishing the age of the Dead Sea Scrolls became the central concern as scholars sought to situate the manuscripts within the broader history of Jewish literature and the development of the Bible. From the outset, dating relied primarily on paleography, the study of ancient handwriting supplemented in the later decades by scientific testing, most notably radiocarbon dating. Together, these methods formed the basis for the chronological framework that underpins the official understanding of the scrolls. Paleographic dating involved comparing the handwriting styles from found in the scrolls with those of other dated inscriptions and manuscripts from the ancient Near East. Scholars analyzed letter shapes, strokes, stroke order, spacing, and stylistic features, identifying patterns believed to correspond to particular historical periods. On this basis, most of the scrolls were assigned dates ranging from the 3rd century BC through the 1st century AD, with some variation among individual manuscripts. These assessments were widely accepted and became foundational to subsequent interpretations of the text. In the late 20th century, radiocarbon testing was introduced as an additional means of verification. Samples taken from parchments and papyrus fragments were analyzed to estimate the age of the organic materials on which the texts were written. The results were generally understood to be consistent with the paleographic conclusions, reinforcing the view that the manuscripts originated in the final centuries of the Second Temple period. Together, paleographic and radiocarbon dating were presented as complementary approaches that confirmed one another, and the resulting chronology placed the Dead Sea Scrolls firmly before the rise of Christianity, a conclusion that carried significant implications for biblical studies. By predating the New Testament era, the scrolls were seen as independent witnesses to Jewish scriptural traditions and religious thought, providing a textual snapshot of Judaism immediately prior to the emergence of Christianity and lending substantial weight to their historical importance. According to the official account, the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls represents a remarkable convergence of chance, historical circumstances, and scholarly invention. Scholarly investigation. What began as an accidental find by Bedouin shepherds in the Judean desert is said to have led to the rediscovery. Bleh, is said to have led to the recovery of vast collection of ancient manuscripts preserved in caves for nearly 2,000 years. Through subsequent archaeological exploration and academic studies, these texts were interpreted as a remnant of a library belonging to a Jewish sect living at or near Qumran during the final centuries of the Second Temple period. Within this framework, the scrolls are understood to have been deliberately concealed during the turmoil, turmoil of the Jewish revolt of AD 70 and preserved by the region's arid climate until the modern rediscovery. The involvement of professional archaeologists and establishment of institutional oversight and the application of paleographic and scientific dating methods combine to produce a coherent narrative explaining both the origin and survival of the manuscripts. Together, these elements form a story that emphasizes continuity, preservation, and historical authenticity. This narrative has been the dominant lens through which the Dead Sea Scrolls are interpreted in modern scholarship. It undergirds prevailing assumptions about their age, their connection to the Essenes, and the significance for understanding the transmission of the Hebrew Bible and the religious landscape of the Second Temple Judaism. As such, it functions not merely as a historical account of discovery, but as the interpretive framework that has shaped decades of academic research for public understanding of the scrolls. And that is the end of whatever chapter that was, chapter 6, I think. And it's also the end of part 1, and we'll be starting part 2 here shortly.